Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Next Action Associates podcast. I'm here today with Alex Gisdakis, who is come to speak to us about his thoughts, his work on the subject of self-management and what's called new work in Germany. Alex is Greek but lives in Germany. And he's a psychologist and social scientist. He's worked for 30 years in industry, most notably as a VP HR at one of the largest global concerns. And he has also done lectures on psychology, and he advises large organizations on stress, burnout, and this idea of how new work is affecting people in the world. Today, we thought we'd get together because we were chatting a while back about how this whole new situation that we have. So the COVID situation has dropped in on top of the new work situation, and we were having a very, very interesting conversation. So we thought we'd take some time to structure that conversation. So thrilled to have you on the call, Alex, and look forward to hearing a little bit more about your ideas on this. So why don't we just jump in with this idea of COVID-19 plus new work? What's the impact of that on everybody out there?
Yeah, so what we observe, I think, Ed, is that COVID-19 and home office changed the way we work, and that will do that forever, I think. Yeah, so there is, and in this new work situation at home, there is a dramatic change for the demand of self-organization in the organization and for everybody. Um, um, and I think home office boosted our virtual collaboration in general. It challenged the companies to open themselves for more virtual work, which I think is good. It was a breakthrough in acceptance for both sides, employees and the companies. It taught managers to do virtual leadership, which was not usual in every way. But and now it shows the cost benefits of you need less office space. We can even see that in the real estate market in Munich. That means that home office will establish in many industries, and we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean for the competencies that the people need? Uh,
So,
so
so your sense is that this is kind of what we were talking about, but your sense is that we were already heading in this direction, right? So with
yes,
the whole idea of new work,
yes.
which was pretty ill defined, but some people had more clarity around it than others, but it's simply been accelerated by COVID.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, we can see that. We are actually in a lockdown situation in Munich. So I am at home. My office is closed. My employees are at home, and but we learned to do that in the last months, and we gathered some new competencies about that. Also, me, I'm using now virtual tools as we do now appropriately. Hopefully, we have learned to collaborate virtually. But what I also learned is that that is a challenge to self-organize yourself. I don't know how you felt in the first lockdown, but I can say my first months were difficult. As although I was used to work from at home sometimes, I did my emails on weekends. But being at home every day and structure the day is a challenge, and we can see there is a disturbing development, which we also saw in the last years, that there are towards more mental diseases, burnout, depressions, and in many industries. And we see first signs that this increases as well in home office situations. And we ask ourselves, what is the cause of that development?
It's
Um,
interesting because when this thing first kicked off, right? Like you, I've worked as a consultant for most of my life, right? So the whole idea of working from wherever I was is
yeah.
totally normal, totally natural. And as this thing kicked off, they were always talking about mental health, and it's going to have this impact and
Yeah,
that impact.
yeah,
And I was going like, what mental health, right? Like you just get on with your work. But like you, right, being forced to work in the same space all the time began to pose significant challenges even to my GTD practice. And if I didn't have next actions, frankly, I probably would have lost the entirety of April and May. Right? It was a tough time to get motivated, get moving on a daily basis. The market's not responding. It was very, very challenging. So as we're now into month 9 of this thing, I really, have a much, much greater understanding for the mental health challenges that we're all dealing with right now.
yeah, yeah. So one could ask oneself, why aren't people more relaxed being at home? Don't they have more saved, or do they save time for not driving to the office, for example? So some people may gain two additional hours, but it's not always the case. So we see the depressions and mental diseases increasing. And one of my hypotheses, some other scientists might have to prove that quantitatively, is that we currently underestimate the positive functionality of a well-structured office surrounding. Yeah, means just how do your days look like? Yeah, so did your days look like? Yeah, you wake up in the morning, you have your rituals to make yourself ready for work. You leave the house. You may prepare yourself mentally by sitting in the car or in the train. You get to the office. You have an infrastructure there. You have colleagues around you that help you. You have guiding rails of workflows around. There's some social interactions, coffee breaks. You have a lot of social relations. For some people, it's more important than their private life. So there are framework conditions that structure my day. Even even if it has been sometimes dysfunctional, those structures, or may have been, there are established routines that help me to work structured, and somehow it helps me to reduce my mental effort for structuring myself.
Mm.
So these structures protected me and protected also my identity and my mental health. So that's what we see now. People were thrown into this home office situation. Also, people who are not like we, consultants, and used to work for everywhere. Everywhere. I saw that with my wife. She's a manager as well, like me. She's managing some 100 people at the city community of Munich, and just first time in her life sitting at home and having to manage. And that's it's a challenge. And so what's more from with home office from a psychological perspective, usually you have your home as the relaxing sphere, and the office is the stressful office sphere. And now we mix these spheres into each other. So the home office hasn't this protective function for me. Getting home, out of my
Mm.
shoes, on my
Mm.
so that's my protected sphere, where I'm also maybe protected from work. And that is something. And there's another topic that comes in, mainly here in Germany for women, that there's a competing bunch of household work for child care and home duties, that it showed in reality that mainly women did it. So 70 to 80% of that work is done by women. And there's even a feminist expression. They say the mental load is exploding. So housework is competing with my office work, and that is there is no protecting barrier separator. So if I go home from office, there's kind of a separator again, sitting in the car in a train, leaving things behind. So there's a psychological
And
mix.
I think that transition time is really,
Yeah.
really important for humans. And now, I mean, I think, if you're commuting 4 hours a day, that's probably not a positive thing. But, if you've got, 20 to 50 minutes of travel time between your work and your home space, that's going to give you time to process and prepare yourself for whatever the new thing is, right? Going to work, getting ready for work, coming home, getting ready for home. And the thing that I noticed when this first happened, right? I had a bunch of my clients who are also advisors, and they were coming to me and saying, well, yeah, but my clients are saying their productivity, everybody's productivity has gone up.
Mm.
And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm not so sure that that's true. Now, I think it was true. Productivity did go up, but it was because everybody was completely freaked out,
Yeah.
right? Everybody was like, well, this doesn't look good, right? I might lose my job, so I'm just going to do all the hours that God sends. And I think we're now beginning to see the impact of that over time. That people, you can't sustain that
At
for
risk.
months.
Yeah, I would call it's a risk for self-exploitation that you're having it in this home office. And I think as a summary, home office can be for me a mental stress factor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as I told you, we see for many years these growing numbers of mental diseases in Germany, especially at brain workers. Who have to be more self-organized also in new work situations,
So
in
not
office.
knowledge workers. Yeah.
Knowledge workers,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge workers. And as I told you, we saw that 2 years ago in a study for a huge American software company that introduced new work. So new work means that they're in open office situations that don't have much leadership. They have to be self-organized. And what we learned is that the stress is reduced if the people learn to be self-organized, which the more experienced people usually can. It's also, we saw also some personality factors. Some people are able to self-organize themselves better. But and I also, if I look into history of work, if you look back, for example, into uh, industrial tayloristic jobs, they have a lot of disadvantages, and we're happy to leave them behind. So Henry Ford's Taylorism, but at least they were well structured. You left behind the portal of the factory, and then there you were in a private life.
See,
Or even,
I think this is fascinating,
yeah,
because if you're a musician, and even back in my performing days, if you have a structure, then you are much more safe in order to go out and improvise,
yeah,
right? If you have no structure, if you show up on stage and there is nothing to lean back on, then it's just pure anxiety, frankly, right?
yeah.
As long as you have a structure and you know that this fits with this, fits with this, and in between those things, I can kind of make things up, and I can do my thing. If we remove that structure, then it's no surprise really that we're starting to see higher rates of anxiety and depression, burnout, whatever it is.
I'm feeling this as well. And at least if I have to write a text or a book or anything, I need an empty space in my head. So I mean, have to reduce that stuff.
Mm.
And I just wanted to go also back to another historical topic. If you look at handcrafts or trades in the past, how much look at a Japanese cook or a German carpenter in history 500 years ago, if they learned this job for 3 years, there was at least 1 year in the beginning where they learned principles about prepare your workspace. So prepare your structure your work. So use the tools that you have. So that is, and still, if you look at these craftsman educations, which we still have in Germany, there's a big portion, at least in the 3 years, it's 1 year preparation and self-organization.
That's
And
amazing, because if you think about it, right,
yeah,
knowledge workers get
no,
precisely zero training on that kind of thing. Say hello to Jake.
is that your dog? I have a dog as well, a poodle. There's another aspect that I think, especially in Germany, will occur. In Germany, you have, as an employer, you have a duty. It's called psychologische Gefährdungsbeurteilung. So it means, as you are responsible as an employer for the safety of the jobs that you're providing in the office. There was introduced, I think 15 years ago, the duty to care for psychological health. And now I'm expecting a big discussion. How can you care for the psychological safetiness of a home office job? Psychological safetiness is normally it's do you have the respective material to work for? Is there a technical surrounding? Do you have computers, proper computer structures? That's one side. The other side, for me, would be important to look after. Do you have a self-organization system somehow? So if I would introduce that into a company, I would look for that. How does it look like, your self-organization?
This is one of the reasons that we decided we should have this call. Was this topic came up in our first discussion, and it's almost like we're limping behind the technology as in terms of creating structures and rules that support good health in individuals, right? So we had an industrial revolution where we created machines that could kind of go all the time, and then we started making humans kaput because they had to keep up with the machines, right? And very slowly, it took a long time to build a set of workers' rights or norms, laws that protected workers. And at the moment, we just don't have those laws for the digital protection or the protection of humans from this 24/7, 365 environment in which we're all now working.
Protect them also from self-exploitation. So at work you have your break times. You go with your colleagues, go for lunch. You leave in the security comes at 8 o'clock in the evening and throws you out of the office. At least in some countries that's the case. And therefore, all these structures that are somehow provided to you at work is something that people have to learn. And if I look from the perspective of the duty in Germany to do psychology, safetiness, or psychologische Gefährdungsbeurteilung, I would introduce that self-organization thing. And what does that mean for me, self-organization? For me, in general, I would first ask, do you have a system to organize yourself? Can you empty your head or your mind from a lot of tasks? Can you structure your tasks? Are there next steps or actions that they require? Can you realistically plan projects? Judge about your resources that you need. There's no colleague to ask at the first step. How do you structure your day or your week? So that's something that I learned with myself. So hey, wow, I'm saving an hour not driving to the work. Stay in bed. Then you're an hour later, just living next to a school, and pupils just were passing by, and I learned, hey, wait, when are the pupils passing by? So they learned, oh, it's 8 o'clock, even over. So I lost my structure in the beginning, and that's something that is important. How do you structure your day and your weekend? And then for me, a very important additional topic comes upon, which is, do you know yourself? So we both are 30 years in business. Some like it or not, you start knowing yourself. So when is the best time? When is your best time for writing or for having phone calls? Where are your limits? I slowly learn where my limits are. So that is not something you have to question at work, because that maybe your secretary or the time schedule structures, but at home you have to structure yourself. So you have to know yourself, when I do what the best. And then given all that, you have to care yourself for a time for relaxation. Are there social interactions? If no bell rings in a factory for a lunch break, you have to do the ring your bell for yourself. Where is your leisure time? So these are competencies, and we shouldn't underestimate those competencies. Besides learning how to run a virtual meeting or how to like you do a podcast. These are important competencies.
I'm really interested in the idea of self-exploitation. That's it's not really an English expression, or it's not an English expression that I've heard, but I think it really is very, very fitting for what's happening with a lot of people in the world of work today, with kind of the omnipresence of digital tools. They're struggling to not overwork.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
When my grandfather sent a letter in the office, he was sure that this letter would probably come back after a week with a reply. So that automatically slowed down a lot. So if you send now an email, could happen that you get a reply immediately, and then you have to work through it, or it gets 5 minutes later and interrupts you again. So all these competencies are competencies we have to teach people. And what I'm saying is that these are competencies that managers should be aware of with respect to health of the employees and also to productivity.
Fascinating. Great stuff. Well, thank you, Alex. Great to have you along, and thanks for sharing, your expertise and your ideas about how both new work, COVID, and what's coming at us is starting to shape the way people are able to work, and some of the things that managers might want to think about as we basically move into a new world of work. Great stuff. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ed, for the opportunity, and see you next time.
Great stuff. Speak soon.